So, something I want to talk about today was the whole back to school season. For a lot of people, that can be a time that's quite stressful, not just because, new material, new class, possibly new teachers, new classmates, but I think just that headspace of being in school for a lot of people is very different from how you are at home. It's like there's a school you and there's a home you, especially if you're like studying away from home or boarding. I think that discrepancy a lot of times is not necessarily a positive one. For example, picture this. If you're at home, you're meeting your friend, you're hanging out with your family, you've got sort of these systems in place that you're very familiar with. Like you know how things work in your house, you know how things work in like the society, you understand like the cultural cues, a sense of humor, different things like that. But then at school, I think, especially for people who maybe are new or are going into another kind of environment, like another culture, that's what the word I'm looking for. You don't have all those familiar things to kind of like orient yourself. So when you're in that new environment, as I said in another video, it's one thing to kind of get used to the school itself, get used to the way that they teach, or the new, if you're moving up a year in your same school, like one thing to get grips with that new material. But it's another thing to try and understand your school, which is like if you want to say like a micro environment. It's another thing to actually not be fully familiar with the like larger macro culture in which your school is. Again, bring up this thing of like sense of humor, bring up these things of like it's the way you relate to people. It's not always the same in every country. Having to understand or learn that and also understand your school and also understand like on a very 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 like granular level, like friendship groups, trying to navigate all of that, it can be a lot. That can be a whole lot. And I think even for people who are not new, when you're still trying to navigate all of that and you're still trying to make friends, you're still trying to get that feeling of being settled in your school, I think that going back to school then becomes like not a nice thought. It's not. It just becomes something that's like almost panic inducing, because again, you're going from like in the holidays being at home, being this like bubbly version of yourself, being this like carefree version of yourself, to a place where and I'm just speaking from things that I've observed, people that I've spoken to, a place where you might not even talk to anyone. When I say talk to, I mean like having a chat, like having a laugh, just outside of the context of like group work in a class, or may I have this dish in the canteen. That's not the talking I'm talking about. You're going to an environment where you might not even talk to someone on that like having someone to relate to level for days. I don't think there's a way to kind of communicate how isolating that is, because it's something that, again, like there's just so many levels of, I guess, complexity, or like levels of social dynamics that you have to work out. Again, like for a lot of people, they feel like if you just say, I feel lonely, that doesn't even scratch the surface of what is actually going on, which is like just struggling to keep your head above water. And I think that feeling is very, nobody wants to feel like that. Nobody wants to go from an environment where they're like okay to somewhere where they feel like they're just in survival mode. I think survival mode is maybe the best way to describe it, because again, a lot of times people say, I don't want to go back to school, or I don't want to go. People might assume that they're talking about, oh, you just don't want to be on your own in terms of like be responsible for yourself or for looking after yourself and that kind of thing. It's not quite that I'm talking about. I'm talking about people saying that they don't want to go back to school, not because they can't look after themselves, but because they don't want to almost have that like what's that thing in like solitary confinement. They don't want to like have to go through that whole survival mode of like, okay, I just have to hold on until I don't know when I'm gonna hang out with someone or have like a genuinely nice kind of interaction with someone, like getting to know and expressing yourself and that kind of thing. So I'm just gonna like bear it. it's almost like having to bear a situation that's really tough. And I think mentally preparing yourself to do that, knowing that that's the situation that you're going back to, I think it's very natural that you obviously won't want to go to that. And I think it's very natural to like have that strong reaction, almost like a panic reaction to the thought of going back there. I think it's very natural. Like again, like to use that analogy of solitary confinement, when you don't speak to people and have that human interaction for a long time, you literally feel yourself like wearing out. I can't explain it, but it's like, you know, when something is threadbare, like a material, you can literally feel your sense of self wearing out. And it's not a nice feeling. It makes you just feel it's like, you know, in COVID during the pandemic when you had to quarantine for 2 weeks, that kind of feeling. It's just it's not like it's like what if someone told you, you know, you're going to do that for 4 months, something like you're going to put yourself through that kind of mental space for 4 months, you wouldn't want to do it, right? I just I think it's something that's again it's hard to convey the intensity of it, and I think that's why a lot of people when in those environments and those schools where you're going through that, people don't often like express it that that's what they're feeling, because again, saying I feel lonely, I don't feel like myself, those phrases don't convey that threadbare feeling. I think, yeah, I just think it's important for people in schools, like I'm talking about the like pastoral side of the schools, and I'm talking about boarding specifically. I think it's really important to just be aware that that is something that a lot of students face. Even people who, you know, the school is just in the same like town, they live up the road from the school. I think it can happen to anyone, but especially international students. I think there needs to be that intentional like check-in. Oh, you have to just kind of be intentional about looking looking out for people